Hey y'all, Matt Smith back here with you. Another SEC preview video on the way. Today it's Mississippi State, a 4-7 team a year ago in Mike Leach's first year. Went 3-7 in the conference, then won a kind of a wild bowl over Tulsa that was marred by a brawl at the end. So hopefully no lingering effects from how last season ended. But overall, a typical roller coaster ride of a Mike Leach season we've seen in the past. You get your couple duds in there, which Mississippi State had plenty of, but still had some big wins, starting with the opener at LSU, where KJ Costello set the SEC passing record. Fizzled out very quickly with losses to Arkansas and Kentucky. Got it together though late in the year, made a quarterback switch after Costello was injured and ineffective. Went to the true freshman Will Rogers, and they played some pretty good football down at the end of the season. Gave Georgia a good game in Athens, played tough in the Egg Bowl, and a loss to Ole Miss. Beat Missouri to close out the season and at least get to a bowl game at 3-7 in the weird 2020 year. So a roller coaster ride. The offense, the running game could never really get going. The toughest part of going into that air raid Mike Leach system, coming from a traditional, more run-based offense under Dan Mullen and Joe Moorhead, is that offensive line going to wider splits, figuring out how to run block the way they want to do it. And it's tough when you got guys being able to attack holes a lot easier than they would in more traditional splits. So that was the struggle for the Bulldogs last year. Could never really get the running game going. But I think they did find a quarterback who could gel with Leach, and that's always the challenge. It's not always the top guy. It can be a lower recruited guy. Gardner Minshew transferred up to Washington State. He was a big hit there. A lot of those Texas Tech guys, from Graham Harrell to Sonny Cumbie, none of those guys were real big-time recruits, but they worked with Leach's personality. Their timing was that they could read defenses pre-snap. Their timing was good. And that's when those offenses really thrive. So they might have that in Rogers. They did bring in Southern Miss transfer Jack Abraham. He's been all over the state. Grew up in Oxford, the home of Ole Miss. Spent some time at Hattiesburg, of course, with Southern Miss, and now he's in Starkville, Mississippi State. So has lived in all three of the FBS cities within the state of Mississippi. So he's played a lot of football over the last few years at Southern Miss. More experienced than Rogers, but I still think Rogers is the guy, and I don't really see a true quarterback competition coming from Abraham being in the mix. But certainly the number two guy and a quality backup to have should something happen to Rogers. So looking at the rest of the offense, receiving core looks pretty good. Jen Wally is back. He had a real nice close to last season, over 500 yards combined in the final 4 games as a freshman. Not a lot of production before that, but man, after their COVID delay, really kicked it into high gear. Finished the season strong, and that receiving core should be pretty good. Added a couple transfers from out in the West Coast. 3 of their top 4, including Wally, are back. So I think that passing game, as a Leach offense needs to, obviously, should be pretty successful. Running game, that's obviously the big question. Can they get a little bit out of that running game? Hardly anything last year. Probably a platoon here with Dylan Johnson and Jo'quavious Marks, 2 kind of different style of backs. We'll hope to get that running game cranked up again. Just struggled throughout last year for obvious reasons with the transition into the air raid. Offensive line as well. A couple guys back, but that's probably the weakest unit on this team. Again, taking guys recruited for an entirely different system, trying to fit them in with what Leach wants to do, plug in some holes through the transfer portal, play some young guys who were recruited directly by Leach. Just kind of a hodgepodge. So to get much stability there, I think that's probably still asking a lot for year 2. But hopefully the play for their sake is improved, and they can have at least some semblance of a running game, which will, of course, open up more lanes in the air raid, as the best Leach offenses in the past have done. So defensively, Zach Arnett was a really good hire. Spent a lot of time working out with Rocky Long at San Diego State, one of the sharpest defensive mind I think we've seen in the past 20, 30 years in this sport. I think he was at Syracuse for a couple months, maybe a few weeks. And then when Leach was hired, kind of late in the coaching cycle, early in 2020, now he plucked Arnett from Syracuse, brought him to Starkville. And that defense is pretty good. They do lose a couple key players. Marquis Spencer off the defensive line was a really big loss. Errol Thompson, a mainstay who played for going back to the Mullen era at Mississippi State at linebacker. So the front seven does have a couple key losses, but there is some talent there. Jalen Crumedy is a real good plugger in that defensive line. Active player, quick, will bat down passes, will register some sacks, which you don't always count on from a nose guard. But certainly the strength of that defensive line there is Crumedy. Linebacking cores, they're all right. You got Aaron Brule there. Probably he was at media days, probably be the captain of that defense this year, I would think. And then the secondary, Emmanuel Forbes led the league in interceptions, actually. Very underrated season. Had 5 last year. Second team All SEC selection. Good experience on that back end. Forbes only going into his sophomore season. Probably not a Darius Slay, Cam Dantzler, some of those guys who have been top NFL prospects. Probably not a guy like that on this roster in the secondary, but an experienced unit and should be pretty decent. And again, I really like Arnett and how he meshes with Leach. So pretty bullish on that defense, no pun intended for the Bulldogs there. Looking at the schedule, it's tricky in the non-conference, actually. You got NC State as the only Power 5 game. They'll come to Starkville in week 2. But you got 2 G5 games sandwiching that. Louisiana Tech, always a solid program under Skip Holtz. They're coming to Starkville in week 1. And then in week 3, after the NC State game, Bulldogs will head up to Memphis and play a pretty good Tigers team. So you don't really get the 3 cupcakes like many SEC teams have. They do have one later in the year with Tennessee State, but Louisiana Tech could challenge them. A game State certainly should win, but that won't be a cakewalk, and the trip up to Memphis neither as well. So I could even see 1 and 2 in that first 3 games. 2 and 1 is probably the most likely record, but 3 and 0 is imperative because after that LSU comes to town. They got to go to A&M, and then Alabama comes to town. So if you're sitting there 1 and 2 with those 3, your next 3 opponents, that's big trouble if you're hoping to go to a bowl game this year. On the positive side, Kentucky is the rotating opponent. Not too bad, probably right in the middle of the pack in the East this year. And then Vanderbilt, Kentucky, the permanent opponent. I believe I just misspoke there. Vanderbilt's the rotating game. That'll be in Nashville. They played them last year in Starkville. Young team, Clark Lee's first year. Should be no trouble there. So overall, while the non-conference is tricky, a couple of nice breaks there, getting Vanderbilt as the rotating game. Not seeing Florida, not seeing Georgia, not seeing Missouri. So pretty good shape for this Bulldogs team. Of course, they'll end the season on Thanksgiving night with Ole Miss in the Egg Bowl there in Starkville. Prediction, I'm going 6-6. I think they do get to a bowl game. I think it'll be close, but I think getting Vanderbilt as the rotating game will probably get them over the hump. So I have 6-6, 3-5 in the league. That does mean a non-conference loss. I think NC State comes to Starkville and wins that game. Dave Doran, for kind of as boring a personality he is, pretty decent football coach. That NC State team is pretty consistent. They'll max out at about 9-3, but they'll probably get you to at least 7-5 every year. I think the consistency of that, I trust a little bit more in that, more than I do the wild guy that is Mike Leach. But there'll be some highs. I'm calling for them to beat LSU for a second straight year. There will be an upset at some point this year. For me, I'm going with LSU. Could be A&M, could be Auburn. We'll see where that lands, but there will be some highs with the inevitable duds that come from just watching a Mike Leach team. So I have LSU, Kentucky, and Vanderbilt as your 3 SEC wins. I do think they survive those tricky G5 games against Louisiana Tech and Memphis. So 6-6, 3-5, decent second year. Not quite the big second year jump we saw at Washington State, but overall, though, a pretty good season for the Bulldogs. I have them in the Texas Bowl, playing TCU. Pretty fun matchup there, I think, between Leach's offense and Gary Patterson's defense. The two never really overlapped in the Big 12. But they did play a couple games back when TCU was going from conference to conference kind of in the 2000s and jumping around. So there is some history there, just not in the Big 12. Leach was gone, of course, by the time TCU joined the league. But a fun way to end the season there in Houston, I think, with Patterson, one of the sharper defensive minds in the sport, going up against Leach's offense. So that's the Mississippi State Bulldogs for you. Again, kind of probably right in the middle of where the consensus will be, anywhere from 5-7 to 7-5. I think will be most of the picks for the Bullies this year. I'm going 6-6, decent year too. Not quite the jump maybe some fans are hoping for there, especially if they don't beat Ole Miss, but a positive after kind of a disappointing first year. Going 3-7, 6-6, pretty solid year I think for the Bullies. And we'll see what year 3 brings as Rogers develops and gets more in sync with Leach. So thanks for watching, guys. Let me know your thoughts below in the comments, of course. Reach out to me on Twitter at MattSmithCFB. Written preview is up at southernpigskin.com, so check that out as well. And thank you all so much for watching.